All right, so today we'll be talking about if Sitecore XM Cloud is really the future of Sitecore. My name is Akshay Sura, and my partner in crime most of the time is
Kamruz
Jaman.
Jaman.
So talking about XM Cloud, right? So what is XM Cloud? So there's a lot of confusion as well as a lot of information flying around. I don't think there's one individual who probably knows everything, but we've been talking to the right people, trying to figure out some of this information for all of us so that we are able to share it with everyone, because we did see there was some discrepancy in thought process. There were site conversations going all over the place. Anyway, so Sitecore XM Cloud is a cloud native CMS, fully managed service. So Sitecore takes care of all of the fun stuff of hosting and all the other wonderful things. The sellable points from an XM Cloud perspective is it has an amazing visual authoring experience, just like how we are used to in our XM and XP. It's supposed to be faster, helps us go more towards composable. So it is completely different to how we are used to from the traditional Sitecore XM XP perspective, and it's more composable. So that's what XM Cloud is in a nutshell. But it's made up of many things. So XM Cloud isn't just one thing. It's made up of a bunch of little services in order for it to be doing what it's supposed to. It is composable and headless. It's 100% cloud. Kamruz?
Oh, that's me. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay. Yeah, so I think when we hear the term XM Cloud, we think it's just Sitecore XM in the cloud, right? But as actually mentioned, there is a number of other things, other services that make up this entire offering. There's obviously the content authoring experience that we're all used to through the old, kind of like the old experience editor, but it's not the experience editor. It is an application called Sitecore Pages. It's further down on our list. So Sitecore Pages itself is an evolution of Sitecore Horizon. It's a modern day editing interface, fast, snappy, and works in a headless manner, as you would expect it to work in this particular case. Unified identity gives you a single sign-on essentially across the entire Sitecore suite of products. As we've also got the XM Cloud instance, but you may be bringing in other Sitecore products such as Sitecore Send, Sitecore Personalize, Sitecore Order Cloud. So this unified identity will give you access to the entire suite of products with a single login and allow you to manage those accounts much more easily for your authors. Sitecore Portal, there's two parts to the portal. There's a portal itself, which will give you access to the different products. So for those of you who attended our previous talk on what it means to be a .NET architect in the composable world, we mentioned that one of the kind of issues moving to the composable world is you need to kind of create your own portal or dashboard for all the products that make up your digital experience suite. Sitecore has a portal built in, so it essentially give you a launch pad for all of the different offerings that that may make up your solution. Then we have the XM Cloud environments themselves. So you have the CM instance itself. You have edge tenants for globally scaling your content, and the Pages app, which I mentioned for the content authoring already. The dashboard itself will give you access to your different cloud environments. So you may have like dev, test, pre-prod, prod, for example. There are some built-in deployment tooling to allow you to push out your code to your XM Cloud instance. We'll talk about that piece a little bit later on. Oh, I also did forget, there is some other bits around like personalization. So Sitecore Personalize, they have a light version of Sitecore Personalize with XM Cloud. Did we have? No, we don't have that on there. But there is a light version of Personalize. It's not the full version, but it gives you some personalization options. And we'll also just cover what composable DXP is, since not everybody would necessarily have been on our previous talk. So the composable DXP mentality philosophy is you use different services or different applications for those particular needs. So you may have a different application for your content, you do something else for your search, something else for your commerce, something for your personalization, and you would then orchestrate all of that together to build out your final presentation, which for your website or your application. If these separate applications, usually headless, usually mark-based, you bring them all together to bring you compose them all together to have your digital experience platform. The XM Cloud offering will bring some of these offerings together. So for example, we have the content layer through the cloud CM instance. There is some personalization through Sitecore Personalized Lite, as we're going to call it. The presentation is brought together, but not in the same way that we're used to with Sitecore XP and Sitecore XM, particularly with the MVC way, where everything is deployed into your monolith. You deploy the code separately, and it will be consumed headless in a headless manner. But Sitecore has brought this together in a bit more of a packaged way itself.
Yeah, one of the other things we wanted to cover as well is the difference between monolith and headless, just because XM Cloud is more headless and composable. We are so used to Sitecore and have been doing it for so long that we kind of forget this. We're so close with our content, with the way it's going to get shown. And pretty much the only channel we work with is web, right? So in terms of storing the data templates, creating the layouts, renderings, having different varied renderings based on personalization rules, that's all we are used to. And we have to go away from that just a little bit, because now from a more composable fashion, the responsibility of XM Cloud is to let you build it. The responsibility of the XM Cloud is to store content. It even lets you, using an editing host, lets you choose how the UI is supposed to look like. If you wanted to do that, that's something on top of your content you do. And it's supposed to give you all of this via an API endpoint, which is the Sitecore Experience Edge. Whether you use it or not, how you use it, it doesn't know, and it honestly doesn't care. So from a headless perspective, when you get the feed from the Sitecore Experience Edge, it's up to you to use it in a mobile app, a POS system, or a website. It's totally up to you. And if there are renderings in place which come as part of it, you may or may not use it. So a couple of the things, what XM Cloud isn't. So it is not a monolith. So we have to get away from that aspect of it, because we're so pigeonholed into working with the traditional Sitecore for so long that we tend to forget that. It is completely new. It is composable. So we can't look at it from like a true monolith perspective. It is a fully managed service. And this is a concept which a lot of people are having kind of like a tough time understanding, especially people who have just purely done Sitecore for the past decade. The whole concept of a fully managed service, and this will probably cover a couple of the other things under it, is the fact that someone else is managing the infrastructure, someone else is managing how it runs, when it runs, if it's down, to bring it up. It is not your problem. Also, the way you should look at it, even though Sitecore is being kind of lenient, because a lot of people probably complained, is you shouldn't be expected to customize your service like the way we are used to. I think from our perspective, we're looking at, as soon as you think of a Sitecore solution, you're like, which pipelines am I overriding? All the all the fields I'm overriding, all of the renderings I'm trying to capture, all of the redirects I'm trying to do. We have like 15 million things which come into our head. You got to start moving away from that. As a service, when you use an external service, forget Sitecore, you do not expect them to let you add a layer of customization on top of the service. They let you customize by letting you use webhooks or other things, which you can then supplement in order to do your customizations, but you shouldn't expect it to be customizable, even though Sitecore is letting you do that. This is a managed service, so unless you're in a dev mode and you do have access to the Docker instances, either to run them locally or you can connect your, whatever front-end work you're doing directly with the instance, the dev instance. There is nothing to install here. So if you have a customer or a use case where someone needs to have it installed in a specific manner in their own instance, things like that, because of government regulations or just the way the company works in terms of their data, that isn't something which is doable. But from a service perspective, if you need it in a certain region, you can definitely work with Sitecore on that part, but it is a fully managed service.
Yeah, and the customizations make sense. I mean, as you mentioned, and then I think Andy just posted, you can customize it, but you shouldn't, right? Because as soon as you customize it, it almost defeats the purpose of a SaaS platform and a fully managed platform. It's going to put you back into those traditional ways of working where now you need to do an upgrade and you can't as easily upgrade because you've customized it. Other headless platforms that we have worked with, you cannot deploy code into their instances. The way you customize applications is by using webhooks and serverless functions. And if you need something like a custom field, they have different ways of doing it where you will host it externally and kind of bind it back into their platform. They host nothing. And as soon as you start to do customizations and you can't do those upgrades as easily, you will potentially hit into other issues, right? Like what happens if there's a security issue and they need to release a hotfix, right? And then you customize it so it may be difficult for them to automatically be able to deploy that. So these are all of the things that we typically expect from a fully managed service. The auto upgrades, the new features, the bug fixes, the security fixes. So yeah, if you are working on this platform and you're going to customize it, I would stop and think twice, 3 times, 4 times, because there is probably another way to achieve what you need to achieve.
Yep. So I think mentioned this before, but is this the right direction? Is this a step in the right direction? We think it is. We think this is long overdue, something Sitecore has been working for a while to get here with their acquisitions as well as the work they've been doing in-house. And we think it's not done yet, right? There's a lot more work to be done, and Rome wasn't built in a day, so they will continue to be working on it. But this does achieve the goal of composability. It gives you options, especially for people who are looking. There's always a case where the traditional way, where it's all in one and monolith, works for some organizations, might not work for some, but for companies who are looking for composability and in the Sitecore ecospace, this is a really good option.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is that although if you look at it from traditional on-prem Sitecore MVP to where we are now, it looks like a big leap. But when you actually start to break it down, you do see that it has actually been a fairly evolutionary process with lots of smaller steps in between. So let's take a look at that, what that looks like. So yeah, there's a lot of us who have been in the Sitecore space for a while, but Sitecore itself has been around for over 20 years now, right? It launched back in 2001 in its initial guise back from Pentia days. But one of the big overhauls came in Sitecore 6.0, right? The core CMS had a fairly major overhaul at that point. things like the content editor and the initial versions of the page editor was released at that stage. That's also around the time that I started working with Sitecore, around 2009. And that was actually the first version of Sitecore that I had worked with. Some more page editor improvements came in 6.2. We started to get things like the data source support. So, we start to get introduced the concept of things like modular design, for example. 2016, we had another big launch with Sitecore 8.2. And the experience editor was the rebranded page editor with the improvements in the experience editor. We also started to get PaaS support. So we're now looking into at least cloud-based infrastructure rather than on purely on-prem or VMs only. So at least it was a bit more scalable, a bit more repeatable in terms of its deployments. And it's also the same year that the first release of SXA was done. SXA had actually been around for at least 3 or 4 years before that, but it was known as Zen Garden by Cognified back then. Sitecore had purchased this module and then essentially rewritten it and introduced a whole heap of new functionality. I think 8.2 is also your favorite version, right, Akshay?
Yeah, 8.2 is one of my favorite stable versions of Sitecore. And then in 2017, they launched Sitecore Managed Cloud. Even though how and what it gets done, it was done by another vendor in the background. But the thing is, what we're trying to show through all of this is the experience which has been gained each time something was launched and how this all pertains to XM Cloud. And then in 2018, the JSS Tech Preview started. We started working with identity servers, or from the old ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET membership, we went into more of an identity server. We now started working on integrations, working with other authentication systems. Then we got wind of Horizon and Zenith. I don't know what happened to the other one, but Horizon was the editor where you can connect it away from a Sitecore instance and work with your layouts. And came containers. So I know, Kamruz, you had brought this up before. Bering had actually started the Docker instances before, but Sitecore took it up officially in 2020. Again, content serialization. We had Unicorn and TDS. Content serialization takes it a step further. Again, showing experience over there. And then coming to Experience Edge. So I think Experience Edge originally launched with Content Hub. Then it was available for the XM instances as well. Again, trying to push content all the way to the edge, being available on a GraphQL endpoint, being able to develop in whatever you need it to. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific front-end technology at this point, but then also having the Next.js JSS SDK so that you can spin up sites quickly using JSS. So in all of this, basically what we're trying to show you is whether it's to do with building pages, whether it's to do with serialization or hosting things in the cloud or security, being headless. So JSS is the first true time when you could think of headless. Going back into 2018, there were a lot of cool apps which were developed on that. So we were just trying to show you that there is an evolution here. There is a lot of learning on this part for us to get to this point. So if you look at the pieces, each of these corresponds, if you think of it as to what was done in each of these boxes on the left, you'll notice that most of the work was already done years ago in order to gain proficiency, to be part of XM Cloud. I mean, there's a lot more things which are part of XM Cloud, but that's what we're trying to show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's Sitecore has taken its learnings over the number of years. They've built up on this evolutionary development, and as a result, they've been able to kind of compose their own knowledge, compose their own sets of services, and actually bring that together to build out XM Cloud. I know, so as I mentioned, I think if you're a traditional Sitecore developer who's just been building on Sitecore MVC, it does seem like a big jump to where we're getting to, but I don't know, those projects are far and few between. But if you've been keeping up with the Sitecore technology and had the luxury of being able to work on one of these newer technologies, I don't think it is as big of a jump. Things like moving from Sitecore XP down to XM, for example, working with JSS, working with even the Next.js SDK, being able to, I know a lot of people are doing that and using the Experience Edge connector. And if you're at that point, then this next step is just a natural progression. So if we look at the development experience, how do we work with XM Cloud? So one of the nice things that I think being able to work with XM Cloud is you can still totally work with containers on your local machine, right? So you can have a local instance of XM Cloud and work on it in isolation away, so you can do the development on your own machine, work within Docker containers, update your templates, update your layouts, check that into serialization using SCS, make your usual Git commits, and then push that up. And it would then go through its build processes and then deploy out. Akshay, on the other hand, doesn't like Docker, unfortunately, so he prefers this other mode, where he would rather just spin up a cloud instance, a dev instance in the cloud, and then just work against that almost, without having to install anything locally. And that's going to be great for your front-end developers who just want to pull down their code, pull out their node modules, work against a headless cloud instance, check their code in, and off it goes. Whereas if you're doing some customizations, you need to do some back-end processes or whatever, then maybe the Docker route is going to be better for you.
And this is a benefit, and no other headless vendor does this, where they give you the option to run something locally. Typically, when you're working with another headless vendor, you're just working off of a cloud instance, a dev instance, so you could spin up multiple projects and stuff in there. But at the end of the day, it's a shared instance, and you have to work with it.
Yeah, it gives you both modes, right? Because I think we've all been used to, we've all at some point worked on that shared database with multiple other developers, and they make a change, but you don't have the code yet, and they're still working on a big feature, and then it breaks everybody else's code. So this will give you both modes of working, and I think it still gives us, for those transitioning at least, it gives us a lot of familiarity of being able to work on local and not worry about blocking or breaking somebody else's code in the meantime. So yeah, as you mentioned, it's the only vendor that I've seen that actually gives us this multi experience in terms of development. In terms of actual deployments and things, so you typically be working on a local machine. However, you're going to do that using containers or the cloud instance. You'd push that up into Git. Sitecore has some build and deployment services. So they would be able to pick up your changes and then build a container image and then push that out into their XM Cloud instance. So my understanding is they are using containers in their background, which would make sense because that's how you're doing your local development. And they would just layer in your changes on top of a base XM Cloud instance and then deploy that out to their XM Cloud instance that your content authors would log into. That content would then get published out to Experience Edge, which would give you headless content delivery, globally scaled and super fast around the world. Now, if your own front-end site, you get to decide how you deploy that, but you could hook that up into the cell. That's happens to be Glenn just happens to be here. He's not paying us for for this, by the way, but do send us some swag if you want. Just happens to be one of the platforms that we really like. But you can just hook that up into Vercel. That will then take care of your builds, your deploys, your CDNs, your global scaling. That's one of the reasons we do love using it. But Vercel would your deployment would then pick up the content from Experience Edge. It will not connect to the CM instance.
Yeah.
Now, if you
sorry, go on.
Go. Okay.
No, personally, like we've tried specifically for Next.js sites. We pick Vercel over other vendors just because it just works natively and it's super fast. So all of our composable sites which are on Next.js, they're all on Vercel.
Yeah. And one of the reasons we pick Next.js, so we picked Next.js is, I know we covered this in the previous talk, but the incremental static regeneration is like the killer feature, especially when you hook it up to a content management system. Static builds are great when you have a static site. They're not so great when it's very dynamic, like with a CMS.
Woohoo. So I think we covered this a little bit. So it's not like you cannot do customizations. I think Sitecore is being nice to let us customize. Hopefully the future it would go towards more restrictions and not letting people customize, just the nature of the service. But to counteract that though, like in order for you to do customizations, you will have access to API and webhooks, so you can have customization. So if you need something built after something gets published, you could probably trigger a webhook, which will go then do something else somewhere else and get your job done. That's the traditional way we've actually worked with any of the headless vendors, is we have quite a few going out from a webhook perspective when something gets triggered based on certain criteria, or things coming in. So having Azure functions or Lambda functions, which depending on other activities with different systems you're connecting to, ping back to the CMS and say, hey, I need this, give me that, update this, pick that up. So there's you could do back and forth, but it's typically no headless vendor on the planet at this moment is letting you customize the base way the service works. So I think it's a good thing and a bad thing, but I think they're doing it just because of the way people are used to working with things and giving you the option. And then going forward, it would probably be difficult to do that. So you should plan to not customize if possible.
Yeah, serverless functions are the way forward. If you're doing headless and you're doing cloud and you're doing SaaS, then that's how you customize, is to use serverless functions, webhooks, and APIs. That did have that on the previous slide. Just that's what they would be communicating with the CM instance in this particular case. And then you'd make your changes, you do whatever you want to do in your own code. Sitecore wants to go and upgrade XM Cloud, push out a new feature. You don't care. It's not touching any of your code. Your code just continues to work without any particular issues. Yeah.
And you want it to be seamless, right? So just to give you an idea from a service perspective, every time the vendor is trying to push a release, they'll let you know first. It's not like it's automatic and you're like, what the heck, my site isn't working. So the whole concept is, hey, these are coming through. If there are any breaking changes, they inform you of that. And again, the less customizations you do, the less you need to do when it comes to upgrading or major version releases, or even for patch releases. Like we don't even think of when upgrades get done on those SaaS-based services because we don't customize anything on there. It's all based on webhooks and stuff. So that's the way to go. That's the future.
Yeah, and I think the versioning as well with XM Cloud, they are moving to semantic versioning to have major, minor patch releases. If they release minor or patch, you can guarantee there'll be no breaking changes. If there is a major release, so from a 1.0 to a 2.0, then there may be some breaking changes. Now, if you have customized, that may mean that you have to now go and update your code, like we've been used to with other versions of Sitecore, and then you need to start, retesting, unpicking bits that you've done, fixing all of the breaking things. If you have made no customizations, then there is going to be nothing for you to update, right? So, yeah, that's it's an interesting way of doing it, and it gives you. It's going to be a nice transition, but equally we need to start learning how to unpick the way we had been doing Sitecore in traditional ways.
Yep, and so we do think XM Cloud is absolutely the future of Sitecore. There's a lot of migration strategies you could think about. There's a talk. We were actually going to release quite a few things publicly, but our talk got selected for a symposium, which primarily focuses on migrating to more of a Jamstack path from XP solutions. And with XM Cloud being launched, that's our main focus of how these migration strategies are going to be for companies looking for a way to go into more of composable. Again, we've said it before, it's not a use case for every single client out there. There might be clients there who are perfectly suitable for an on-prem install of the way Sitecore is 10.2, 10.3 probably is just around the corner too. So it might make sense for some of them, but most of them in the industry is going towards composable. So we will be talking about migration strategies, how to think of things, how many steps you could take to go from a current XP system to XM Cloud, and what does the path look like depending on how you implemented your site. Because as you all know, every implementation is exactly the same. Every implementation is completely different at the same exact time. So it truly depends on every install. So with that, questions? Come on, you gotta have some questions. We got a crazy amount of questions yesterday. We spend more amount of time on answering questions than the actual presentation.
Hey, Akshay. Ken, how's it going?
Good.
Right. Thanks for that. That's great. It's a little bit early here. Just one question about using Experience Edge, the GraphQL APIs instead of the layout service. I can see that when you create the JSS app, you can say fetch with, and you can say I want the REST service or the GraphQL. Is there much change to a JSS app that's already been built to switch across to those APIs from the layout service?
No, not at all. If you're already on JSS, the migration path is fairly simple and fairly straightforward.
Yeah, it is moving across from that layout service to the, Andy's joining again. He can probably answer better. I know Rob Earlham recently went through this exact same scenario where he was upgrading as a .NET Core rendering app rather than JavaScript, right? JSS app itself. But he went through this exact same process of moving that MVP site from the layout service to Experience Edge. I don't think it was a huge lift, but Andy, maybe you have some info on that.
I could say that you can check out the code. It's xm-cloud-introduction, I think underneath our Sitecore repository on GitHub. And Rob is giving a presentation at SUGCON ANZ next week about this migration. And I think also probably, I don't know about Symposium, I'm not sure.
He's doing one
Sebastian
on DevOps.
Winter, I think, is for sure giving one at Symposium. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's going to depend, of course, on how big your site is and how much customizations you made in terms of like the rendering sources and stuff, right? So Yeah.
Thank you. Andy, are you going to SUGCON?
Yes, I will
Isn't
be
he
there
pre-
next
isn't he
week.
presenting?
I'm at the second keynote.
Sweet.
Nice.
Can I borrow some of your slides, Akshay?
Sure.
All right.
Me too.
I'll take that as a good sign. We didn't completely mess it up.
The timeline stuff is good. I like that.
We should have promised more, given Andy more work. Andy and just more work. Yes, you can. It's one red button you click to move from MVC into XM Cloud. Not, you can't do that. But
I just had a follow-up question with the same thing related to GraphQL and layout services. We recently ran into one situation where we were trying to use GraphQL and it had a limitation on the number of complex queries or something. The complex computation, and we have to bump the number up. And we are talking here about 20 items. So specifically, I need to pull some 20 news items. It's not complicated data. I was trying to use GraphQL. We ran into issue with like 20 items and I have to bump the number up. So will that be anything that, like, if you go full on GraphQL, I know GraphQL is much more powerful, but my limited exposure I got ran into these issues. So what is your thoughts on that? If you're moving entirely from out of layout services and moving towards GraphQL with
it's not the number of items you pull. It's mainly how many joins you have and how many things you have to expand. That's the pure thing about GraphQL. No matter which vendor you go to, this is the same exact problem you'll always hit. But you have to find your threshold. So just to give you an example, say if you have a page content item which links to 15 other things, which link to 15 other things, you might just pull one page. It's still a complex query because it's having to open up all of those attributes and sub-attributes and things. So it might be a question of how you structure your content and how you restrict the amount coming back in terms of the depth it goes to, things like that. But predominantly we've been using GraphQL for the longest time. From what our experience is, we haven't really hit many issues where you see a threshold. When you hit a threshold, you figure out where the threshold is. Sometimes you have to bump it. Sometimes you have to change your query a little bit.
Yeah, and there's some, I believe there's some leeway that if you run into limits, definitely file a ticket. But let's be clear about one thing. The layout service, there shouldn't be any limits on that because that's just one item. That's just published JSON coming over. If you have an item query or a search query, I could see that happening, but definitely not on the layout. But it's all about complexity, like Akshay mentioned. How many relations and how that complexity is calculated right now. I believe it's how many fields come back per and multiply that by the number of or the depth and the number of relations you have, like, is basically your complexity. Yeah.
On the same note, we also ran into another problem, which is also relevant. I'm not sure how would XM Cloud handle this, or is there a way that we can bump it up? We ran into an experience editor issue. One particular page was not able to edit the page. We had a Sitecore support ticket, it went for like a couple of weeks, and finally we figured out it was the regular items limit that has to be bumped because of placeholder settings or something. Internally, it was trying to fetch more items than the limit of 100 items or something. But it didn't throw any errors in the front end, but you couldn't edit the page. So if that is the case, we did patch it. I was wondering, like, we could do the same with XM Cloud. So
I would just file a support ticket if you run into any issues. Al is really responsive, and we're fully invested in meeting customer needs on these types of things. So it's SaaS. We can update it within, as soon as we know the problem, we can update it right away. So that's one of the beauty.
Just don't customize anything. We'll be fine then. You get it straight away. But yeah, I mean, that is one of the beautiful things about it is if you do run into this issue, you're not going to have to then go and collect a bunch of log files and pull up the code and send them this code snippet and send them your config files. They will just have access to that.
Yeah, and your repo that you're pushing with customizations to XM Cloud. So they have everything, but yeah, from a display perspective, it truly depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
Any other questions, guys?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
For the local development, you can have cloud versus Docker, and I believe it was brought up that you could use like Sitecore content serialization with Docker. Can you use Sitecore content serialization with the cloud instance, or is that more just like you have to use the Docker to do something like that?
Any environment, as long as you have the content serialization file saved, then you should be able to push it to any environment as long as you direct it there.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
So one other thing I want to add is the XM Cloud has its own container image. It is not the same as Sitecore XM. That is a misconception a lot of people have.
Yeah, but it's a separate set of images. Yeah, and there'll be a separate set of NuGet packages for it as well.